Hey folks, how you doing? It's the middle of the week and we're glad you made it with us. Welcome to Do You Even Anime? It is me, Gable-san, and my dear friend and chief anime inspector, Teo-kan.
Tio-kun,
How about that?
absolutely. Welcome, Mr. Gable. And before we begin, I must ask you, Gable-san, how would you define the pretense of this show for people who have not seen it before, which I would guess is a lot?
Yeah, considering it's our first episode, I would describe it as us challenging each other to watch more anime in the Vegas way to describe it. In one way to describe it, we're probably going to torture ourselves a little bit,
Torture is a
trying to
good
get.
word, by the way. I really like some of the things that we've chosen. So, just to give a quick rundown, basically, this podcast is an effort to make us watch, sorry, for us to make each other watch as many shows as possible and to simply expand our boundaries into anime shows maybe we wouldn't encounter on our own. So, the model for that will be each week. One of us, either myself or Gable-san, will challenge the other to watch an anime that they have never seen before. And then after watching three, maybe four episodes, however long it takes before they tap out, then we'll talk about our experience watching that show. But the only rule is it has to be something the other person has not seen before, because that's what this is about. It's about expanding horizons, it's about making us experience things we wouldn't otherwise, and answering that question, do you even anime?
Absolutely. But since we're on the first episode and we didn't really challenge either of us, we wanted to go over something we both recognized as a starting point, something comfortable that everyone who's generally considers themselves an otaku would be fairly familiar with. It's a fairly popular, would you call it a franchise?
I would say a franchise at this point. Now, it's funny you should mention a franchise because what's interesting about this show, for those, it's pretty obvious based on the graphic, is Tenchi Muyo, is there's not just Tenchi Muyo, there's Tenchi Universe, there's Tenchi in Tokyo, there's Tenchi in Space, there's Tenchi Babies, there's Tenchi Everything. And that's not really what we're talking about for this particular one because the one that we wanted to watch specifically is the Tenchi Muyo Ryo-Ohki OVA that specifically aired on Toonami. This is ground zero for the Tenchi canon. This is the first and really the progenitor of this massive, not only franchise, but formula.
Right. And funny thing about it is that it did air in Toonami here, and it was only the first two, what they would call series. We call them seasons over here. But we only got the first two out of the four, because I know we tend not to research. That's a pride. There's a point of pride for us, but I did a little research because I was curious and I wanted to look into the just Tenchi history because there's an odd amount to it. But generally, this was the first thing that they developed after they worked on the creators. I forget their names at the moment, so much for my research, and I don't have it in front of me. But they worked on Bubblegum Crisis OVA.
Mm-hmm.
And they had one of the characters they liked and they wanted to base a different show off of, and that person ended up being the character of Tenchi. It wasn't a complete transfer, but they kind of molded him into what we know as Tenchi, and they wanted to kind of flip the whole one person of one gender and a whole group of another, in from one girl to a bunch of guys to one guy and a bunch of women.
For the
And
record, by the way,
so,
the director of the original OVA was Hiroki Hayashi.
right, right. I'm going to be terrible with names, especially if I try to pronounce it. I'm going to butcher it most likely. That's why I'm afraid of pronouncing some of these names.
No, that's fine. And the
Um,
original manga was Hitoshi Okuda.
right. The thing to keep in mind about OVAs is even though it was broadcasted over here, OVAs tend to be a direct-to-video product in Japan. And something I wanted to go over, if
Well,
you'll
go
indulge
ahead,
me a little bit,
please.
is that in Japan, the industry is a little different. There's a huge amount of differences, but I'm not going to go into all the details. But the general thing is around the 1960s, TV hit them bigger than it hit us. Like over here, we were like film was afraid that TV was going to run them out because it was in their home. They didn't have to go anywhere. And so there was that fear. In Japan, it basically happened. Theaters were completely run out, but it was a massive decrease to the point that they charge more for movie tickets over there, even when you consider conversion, than they do over here. And so the video market became a bit bigger thing than it did here, where here you basically have a bunch of direct-to-video, which is either a sequel that they didn't want to release, like an extremely goofy movie, as we featured in our last episode, or something to confuse grandmas to get for their kids because they pronounced the name wrong or something.
Right. If you do not have a theatrical release in America, you are bottom barrel.
Yeah, absolutely. But over there, there's something that's called V Cinema, which is basically their direct-to-video market, which is actually a spot where a lot of directors use to experiment. I hope I'm pronouncing this name right. Takashi Miike. I am so sorry if I pronounced that wrong. He's a famous director. He's probably one of the more famous modern Japanese directors. He directed Ichi the Killer, Audition, the most recent remake of 13 Assassins. He directed a lot of those, but he also has a lot of straight-to-video movies that he uses to experiment. One very popular one is Visitor Q, and the point I'm trying to get at is that their direct-to-video market is a lot more substantial, and OVA is also spawned off of basically that growth in direct video, where these people can come in, be more experimental, not be so rigid about the guidelines of television. They can be more gory.
There, but I do want to point out one of the keynotes of the OVA market is because they are released direct to video, they're not subject to the same restrictions as film and television, so they are notably more graphic, both sexually and violence-wise. They have this almost reputation for that.
Right, absolutely. You not only do you have things like Tenchi, which is probably on the lighter side of things, but as I mentioned earlier, Visitor Q, which is more live action, but they have a lot of much more risque anime and such like that. Sometimes it's movies, sometimes it's a mini series, sometimes it's even a 4-series show, like we got here with Tenchi Muyo, and we're going to talk about the first two. But I wanted to lay that groundwork so people had more of an understanding of when we talk about the OVA, why things might be different than what happens on the later actual TV shows, Tenchi Universe and Tenchi in Tokyo, because those were actually broadcasted in Japan. So there will be differences.
Well, it's worth mentioning.
I just wanted to lay that context.
It's worth mentioning also that the version that aired on Toonami was heavily censored.
Yes.
The plot is largely intact, but there are a lot of scenes that, quite frankly, there's not a way to even include them in the in an anime episode on American television, because they have those elements of sexual content or violence or swearing even. But with that said, is this the first time you've ever watched the uncensored version, so to speak? Or the original, as it were?
Yeah, this is actually the first time I've watched the uncensored version. This is the first time I've actually watched the original Japanese voice actors instead of the dub, which, if I can just go over the dub real quick.
Please.
The dub, for the most part, is not bad. My only real big complaint is Tenchi himself, because he kind of sounds like slow compared to his Japanese counterpart in the American version.
There's that problem of lip flaps and also limited budget and all sorts of things, but I do know what you mean. I am definitely encountering with Tenchi the most cases of dragging out vowels and things like that.
Absolutely. I will give credit. He did, the guy who definitely tried, and he did have a lot of things he needed to work around. But also the other voice actors in the dubbing still did fairly good. One of my favorites is Ryoko. The differences in the Japanese and the American dubbing, while somewhat vast in terms of their characterization, they both do a very good job. Where in the Japanese, it's more sultry and seductive kind of character. In the American version, is kind of more rough, and I would describe tomboyish in style.
Well, and the thing about Tenchi specifically is that I feel that Tenchi kind of gets a bad rap in this regard, because so much of the focus is on all of the women. It tends to get lumped in as part of a harem genre. And I think, and the reason I bring that up is because the voice acting is only part of that whole, in that as much as I do like the voice acting, it's the characters that really strike me as what is unique about this show.
Absolutely. And I do want to point out though is that the this came out when in terms of dubbing, this came out during a period where dubbing quality assurance was very mixed and chaotic. Where and I was watching Digimon not too long ago, and so there was kind of I kind of have perspective here, along with Monster Rancher. So there's kind of three levels to this. With I noticed with at least Cartoon Network releases, they tend to keep very well to the source material. They tend not to verge off with like name changes and such. It wasn't always like that.
You're
It's not
comparing it
always
to
like that.
4Kids in this case, which is notorious for just completely and totally almost spitting in the face of source material in some cases.
Right, absolutely. Well, and like the comparisons I have is like there's the Tenchi and Dragon Ball Z and all that. They tend to be more faithful. They use the Japanese names instead of renaming them. Though Sailor Moon, they didn't do that. They named her Sabrina. But then there's the midpoint. I'd like to point out the
Serena
American
the Teenage
dubbing.
Witch, yes.
Which I think that was their point, but I'm not sure. But the middle point being Digimon, where they kind of use the Japanese aspects of it, like their nicknames or whatever is obviously they show is a reference to their Japanese name, but they kind of Americanize it. And there's some dubbing where you can tell that it's the American side getting in. There's some point where it seems like it's pretty faithful to the Japanese side, though I've never heard the Japanese voiceover, so I can't really speak on that. Where Monster Ranchers, you can tell it's a butchery. The opening song is one of the worst remixed, or one of the worst mixed rap songs I've ever heard for an opening theme. It was the voice acting is not very good for the most part, and the story is kind of you can tell is kind of butchered by trying to localize it to a degree. But it's kind of funny when you compare it that we kind of actually got a fairly decent product with Tenchi in terms of what we could have gotten in that time period. Where nowadays it's fairly faithful because people are very very vocal about what they want.
Well, and to kind of bridge off that, the other thing that I find unique about the Tenchi Muyo Ryo-Ohki specifically is that even though it does branch into sci-fi and fantastical elements, as a whole, it's funny you mention localization because this really does feel like one of the more, pardon the phrase, Japanese animes that are out there. I don't
Absolutely, there's a lot of Japanese culture that's very sunken into Tenchi, whether it be the architecture, which is fantastic, the design
clothes.
of this show.
People wear kimonos and sandals. Tenchi lives in a temple, I believe. No, he lives by a temple. It's a shrine.
Yeah.
But
And so there's some stuff that they would have never been able to avoid in the dubbing. And so I think they just like, let's just keep it fairly close. And the people who tend to work at Cartoon Network tend to really be careful with that sort of thing.
I do want to also add, as long as we're talking about technical aspects, is that the art style in Tenchi is one of my favorites because it has that anime aesthetic, but it isn't exaggerated. The characters seem fairly realistic.
Absolutely. It is really one of my favorite art designs of almost any anime show because it's when you get to the science fiction, the alien ships, all that, it gets fairly unique. There's some recognizable anime tropes in design, but a lot of it is very unique where you go to the Jirai ships. I'm pronouncing that right, I hope.
That's fine.
Yeah, the Jirai ships where they're very wood, tree, nature kind of based, and it's a very unique design that you don't see in a lot of anime, and that maybe some anime kind of ripped off from it. And then you got Ryoko's ship, Ryo-Ohki, which is kind of this kind of jagged diamond shape, and the kind of insides and how they work is very unique, and it's one of my favorite things. And the aesthetic of the show overall, beyond the ships and whatnot, is very unique, and it still draws me in. Like that was one of the things I wasn't expecting when rewatching the show after so long.
We are going to get a bit ahead of ourselves because we are. Before we get into the specifics with the spaceship, and I do want to talk about it, we kind of want to have to cycle back to our protagonist a bit.
Right. Sorry, I get ahead of myself because it's probably one of my favorite parts of the show.
Absolutely, no, and that's the art design on the spaceships is fantastic. It's original, it's creative, it's great to look at. The character designs on the people are absolutely beautiful. The villain designs and both on the Jiraiyan's and just every character that is in there is unique and memorable. When you look at someone like Mihoshi, you remember her uniform with the little fluffy tail fluffy tail on it. You remember the spaceship with the cube, and then she's turning it and things are appearing. It's all very alien, but it is still all very memorable and striking, which is to its advantage.
Absolutely. But let's talk about Tenchi. And I think Tenchi is a very big point in what a lot of, because this spawned off, like, it didn't create, but it blew up a genre of anime, of harem animes.
Mm-hmm.
And
I don't know if it necessarily did that, or if it was simply. I don't know if that was. Obviously, that wasn't its intention, but when I think of the first super popular harem anime, it's hard to look past Tenchi, because they certainly existed before this, but it tended to be thought of as, well, at worst, something that is more adult, or even more just simple, very niche shows. This really, to me, strikes me as the first mainstream harem anime that blows up, especially in America.
Right. But the point I wanted to get to was about Tenchi himself, where you see a lot of other harem animes. The protagonist tends to either be kind of nerdy, a loser, weaselly, perverted, and such. But Tenchi is surprisingly a good role model in comparison to those people, because not only is he respectful of the temple and such, disregarding him breaking into the locked gate.
There's a lot about that first episode that's weird.
Yeah, but he helps around planting like the carrots and stuff. He does a lot of chores. He's very respectful towards the female characters. He doesn't take any cheap shots. If anything, he gets thrown into these bad situations. But he himself, unlike a lot of harem protagonists, he is actually a good role model and represents a strong character, where others are kind of more trying to be a sort of fan fiction, where they kind of try to draw the fan in to be the avatar, if you get what I mean.
And specifically, so the harem genre, when I think of it, you're right, there is a certain level of individuals wanting to live vicariously through the protagonists. There's a case where the women are throwing themselves at this individual basically for no reason a lot of times. And what's interesting about Tenchi specifically, and that I really like, is that formula is there. Every single one of these beautiful women want to fall in love with, marry, or sleep with Tenchi, depending on the individual. But what's fascinating to me about it is that it really does build reasons why each one would do that. There is an inherent character arc to each girl in explaining why she would or would not be attracted to this guy. And it doesn't start out that way.
No, it doesn't.
Ryoko is trying to kill him. That's the first thing we see.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's something to be said about that in terms of the later episodes. But let's kind of get. I don't want to go do a whole rundown like we did on an extremely goofy movie.
Right.
But let's kind of forewarning. If you didn't guess by now, spoilers. Sorry. But
watch the show. I recommend it. Support the show. Do everything. It is worth it.
Absolutely.
I can't speak to any other one except this one, but this is a good one.
Yeah, and as far as it goes, I think the first 6 episodes, the show is fairly strong for what it is, but I think the first 6 episodes are probably its best.
Well, it's definitely the most tightly written, because it strikes me as the most ABCD plot. And not do a rundown, but you have Tenchi discovers Ryoko. This leads to Aika landing. This leads to Mihoshi landing. This leads to Kagato finding them. Kagato is evil. They have to fight Kagato. The end. It's very ABCDE. And one of the things that's interesting about this is when I think of Tenchi Muyo's reputation, you think of it as being a slice of life show. You think of it as being very realistic, very down to earth, and based on this, while that certainly is there, a large majority of the show is fantastical nonsense in a good way.
Right, and a thing I want to point out about the sci-fi element is that it's funny because it kind of it starts out as fantasy. It hints at fantasy, but then it moves into sci-fi. But then it kind of backspins back into fantasy, if that makes sense.
So I see what you're saying anyway, but what's interesting about it is that the show really does relish Tenchi Muyo Ryo-Ohki in two things, what I notice. And that is, it's split between two stories. You have the story of, Kagato Ryoko, and you have all these interstellar space politics and action and laser swords and destinies and hero's journey, all of this. It's all there. And then you have the case of characters just basically going around anticing, to borrow a strong bad phrase. They are just having, I have to make dinner for Tenchi because that will impress him and he'll want to make me his bride. And
Well, yeah, and that brings us into the kind of the next 6 episodes where we kind of get like 3 or 4 episodes that are very slice of life style.
That villain comes out of nowhere, doesn't he?
Yeah, kind of. Like, not that it isn't interesting, but he kind of. I feel like here's the one of the few real critiques I would have of Tenchi, like that I can really put down into words, is the fact that if it was up to me, taking those like very slice of life aspect episodes, I think if you were kind of clever enough, you could have crushed them down into two, like split the plots a little, because there are good things in those episodes. The things they reveal about characters are phenomenal, but a lot of the antics seem like they're way too widely spread, if that makes sense.
Well, let me ask a question, actually, and I'm going to answer your question with a question. You didn't ask a question. The point remains. Does this show even need a villain? Now, without that, of course, you lose the obvious interstellar space politics and all that. But if I think of the appeal of this show to a lot of fans, is that they do like these slice of life things. They like the scenes of characters anticing and running around and basically just being themselves. And once you have the necessary plot where all of the characters are in the same place, could you then simply have a series of events that are not consequential, that are not dramatic? Because I'm actually the opposite. I kind of feel like the stuff with Kagato and the second villain whose name I can't even remember because I just think of him as Kagato too.
Dr. Clay, by the way.
Dr. Clay, thank you. It just so falls out of nowhere, and it kind of just jumps in and is like, okay, I'm the plot now. And
well,
it's cool, it's fun, it's interesting, but I don't know if it belongs in this love story, basically.
Well, here's the thing. I think this is going to be where we slightly diverge, because I really like the space opera aspect of it. I think it gives it a different twinge to it, where like a lot of these harem animes, they don't have really, even if they have solid characters, they tend not to have something that pulls me specifically in, where I like drama, and I like it even in slice of life. If they can put in a good drama, it would be something that really pulls me in. Now, in terms of villains, Kagato I think was a solid one. Maybe they dealt with him a little too fast.
But Dr. does not sell anything these people do to him.
But Dr. Clay himself, I can agree with you. He felt rushed in. He kind of dropped out of nowhere, and they kind of swept him out, like just as fast as he came in. And that I was kind of disappointed by that, because I felt like they could have done a lot more, at least foreshadowing or having him insert more. Because I did like what happened during those episodes, but I felt like he did come out of nowhere when we were starting to get this slice of life thing.
Now,
but
one question I do want to ask you, that you're comparing it to other harem shows. And just off the top of my head, I'll name one. Have you ever seen High School DxD? That one's pretty famous.
I'm sorry, repeat that one?
Have you ever seen High School DxD?
I saw one episode, and
Yeah. And the plot of that is that you have this guy who is a pervert, and he
right.
happens upon a club made of voluptuous devil women. And then they all are in love with him because he has the power to make girls' clothes fly off. That is stupid.
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
Makes no sense. And what I think is actually one of the most interesting things about Tenchi as a harem manga goes, because as you mentioned, OVAs are not a sure thing. They released 6 episodes, and then there was a special, I believe. But in those first 6 episodes, they're still introducing new characters in episode 6. Washi doesn't show up till the very end, and she's considered one of the main cast. They do take their time a bit more with these characters, and I think that works to the show's advantage.
Absolutely. But if I can kind of jump a little in this, it kind of still remaining on the same aspect. The things that bother me about the slice of life aspects episodes is that I feel like they had great concepts, but it feels like a lot of time killing for an OVA, which is weird. Like TV, I can kind of get it. Like you're trying to get from one point to another, maybe even save budget a little. But with OVA, you're kind of, maybe not budget-wise, but time-wise, you're open to do what you can. And they want to spend time on these characters, but I feel like there's small bits, not it's small, but like in comparison to the episode, like there's one episode that's an hour long that might not needed to have been an hour long.
Was that the?
But
was
they
that
do
the one
release
after Kagato? Because that was the special. That was like a. I don't know if that was released separately, but I do know that was when I watched it was titled as a special.
the one where they're reading the mangas and they get the idea to how to hit on Tenchi. Okay, that's a special. Like I didn't realize that because I didn't. I was just watching it.
No, but the reason I know that is because it was 40 minutes, and I agree with you. That probably could have been cut into 2 episodes.
Well, and you could probably have crushed it down even a little bit too, because there is good. Again, like with all these episodes, there's good information revealed, but the episodes themselves may not have needed to have been a lone plot in comparison to the others. Because I could have seen like them kind of pushing plots together, not all of them all together at once, but kind of mixing plots so it didn't need to be so like open. Like if we can get into this discussion, my least favorite episode, even though it still has good things,
the baby episode.
Okay, no, that's my second least favorite episode.
Sorry, I had to try.
My least favorite episode was actually when they returned to the hot baths. For one specific reason. Even though it reveals something really important to the characters, I hate the resolution so much because it's like, again, we're talking about spoilers, so hopefully you're not too bothered by that.
There's a moratorium.
But it's basically revealed that Sasami was assimilated with Tsunami.
She's a homunculus.
Yeah, basically, but the whole idea is during when Ryoko attacked the dry planet, everything was crazy earthquake and whatnot, and Sasami, being a very little girl, was wandering around in kind of a bridge area room, and she ended up falling, cracking her skull, which is fairly morbid.
It's graphic,
but
she's like in a pool of blood.
Yeah, absolutely, which is kind of sticks out, but it's weird because
Love
so
the show,
it's
by the way, not a lot of blood. That's why it's so weird.
But and then you can see her. She's basically presumed dead, but she's absorbed by a tsunami, and to a point you're supposed to assume they assimilated. Well, in the episode with the hot baths, which there's a lot of good reveals and there's a lot of good laughs. The thing is, she's kind of bothered because she doesn't feel like she's the real sister of Ayeka. I hope I pronounced that right. Again,
you're
I'm
fine.
not great.
You're good.
Okay.
Go by the dub pronunciation.
Yeah. the general thing is that she's like, I'm not your sister died. And I'm like, oh, that's actually fairly interesting. And then they're like, oh, and then they do their thing, which is kind of heartwarming.
They full house it.
Um, yeah, a little. And but then they're like, oh, but how do we deal with this now? And then Tsunami comes up. Oh, it's not true. She's confused because she's a stupid kid. She's actually assimilated. She's still the same sister, which I felt was kind of a stupid idea because you had something interesting with her not being the sister and them having to deal with kind of this drama in their head. But then they're like, oh, no, fanfare ending. She's really the same sister. We developed a drama. It would have been one thing if they just said she assimilated. And she's kind of confused about that. But then they brought up that she thinks she's not, and then they resolve it in like 5 minutes. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean, and honestly, that whole plot point feels kind of unnecessary, just in general.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of get what they were doing. It's like, haha, plot twist. But the plot twist has to make sense thematically. And Sasami is really one of the only characters. You know, I wonder, now that I'm thinking about it, I wonder if what they were thinking is that Sasami doesn't really fit in with the rest of the cast. She's the only character without a real arc of her own. And so let's give her an arc. But then they went too far.
Right, and I feel also like partly it's because okay, so Sasami is still a good character in my opinion.
I love Sasami. She's very cute.
Yeah, but she's obviously like okay, so difficult subject time. With
right.
a lot of harem animes, they have the young character or the young looking character, and there's obviously a connotation there. We all know it. I'm not going to say it out loud.
Hold on, viewers, we're going somewhere with this.
But with Sasami, she's the young character, but she's not a love interest.
She is not. Absolutely.
She is just the little sister character, and so I think there's a part of me that thinks that they wanted, because for some reason even the rabbit cat wanted to bone Tenchi.
Oh, you're getting way ahead of us.
Yeah, sorry.
Man.
We'll wind it back. But I feel like they made Tsunami so they can have that a little conflict there. Like they joked at the end of the episode because they're like, oh, now she's going to be way more beautiful than any of us and whatnot. And so I feel like that's part of the reason. I like that Tsunami and Sasami are connected, but I feel like they kind of flubbed it. And I don't know where else to talk about that. But
let's kind of take a step back because I do want to go back to the relationship. So.
Yeah, right.
One of the things that sets Tenchi apart from other harem anime to me is the justification and the way we see why these women like Tenchi. And we have individual reasons. With Ryoko, and again, I guess this is spoilers, that she's watched him since she's been trapped in this shrine and watched him grow up, and she's basically been almost like a mother figure, but she's known him all her life, and she's old enough, she wants to be with him.
Right.
With Ayeka, there's the obvious connection because he's a very nice young man who is polite, and she's surprised by this, and she also finds out that he's Jiraiyan royalty, and that's also something that they're compelled to do, is to marry, keep it in the bloodline, which is a little weird. But
yeah, that's something that I feel like they were like, it's there, but we're kind of brushing it under the rug.
Gloss over it, they say. Mahoshi is because Tenchi saved her life when she came to Earth.
Though I feel hers is the flimsiest, next to the rabbit cat.
Yeah, but to be fair, Mahoshi with a flimsy excuse is totally in character.
No,
hold that thought. I don't want to talk too much about Mahoshi. We'll come back to her. Because also then Washu witnesses Tenchi's bravery fighting against Kagato, and then she sees him do these things, and it all feels very earned. There's a reason that these women all care about Tenchi or see him as a potential partner, romantic or otherwise. And you don't see that in as many shows today as I would like to see. Not to suggest they don't exist, but by and large, the harem formula that we get today is they're all in love with him immediately.
Right, absolutely. It's almost like he walks into the house and they want to bone him.
Yes. And I don't get that from this show. Even in 6 episodes, I don't get this idea of them throwing themselves at him. which is what it kind of gets the reputation for. So I was surprised.
And I want, if I can talk about, if we can get onto like kind of discussing each character's relationship, I find Ryoko's is fairly interesting as they reveal with Zero Ryoko, is that if anything, Ryoko's kind of holding back a bit because I think the point of her character is she's trying to kind of dilute the feeling with lust, which is a very interesting character trait for her. Because if we can talk about it, there are boobs in this show, like obviously. It became surprising
I would
watching
think
the
that
uncut version.
Ryoko is naked for probably about 35% of her screen time.
Yeah.
That's
But
an
I don't
exaggeration,
think.
25, but still.
Yeah. But
One scene in four.
but it to be to avoid sounding like a typical male trying to justify fan service, but I feel like it's not absolutely pointless. Like obviously there's a point of it where it's purely fan service, but I feel like it reflects in her character better in the sense that she's very open about her confidence in not only her body but her sexuality, and she's just very confident about how she struts. Where Ayeka isn't, and so there's that moment where she gets the towel pulled off, and it's this big thing. It's obviously fan service, but it's also reflective of her character, where it's not completely pointless. Like yes, it's fan service, but it actually does a very good job with setting something up about these characters.
Well, and what's interesting specifically about the fan service in Tenchi is that it's contextually appropriate. One of the things I do notice, not just with harem anime, but any anime in general, is that whenever a scene involves nudity feels gratuitous, it usually is because it also is contrived. It is put together specifically so that we can have a naked scene. Now, you could answer, do they have to go to a hot spring to fight this monster? No, they don't. But with that exception, pretty much the only time you ever see the women without clothes is bathing, and that's about it.
Yeah, it's fairly well put, where it's not, at least it's not like even the most inappropriate places,
And they're
which
not
there are
like
definitely shows.
they're not fondling each other. They're not like pulling each other's clothes off to make the protagonist excited. It's all very much certainly risque. Certainly, I would even go so far as to say unrealistic. But these are all, for lack of a better word, realistic scenarios. I just said it's not
They're
realistic, but these
they're
are
characterized.
believable. There we go, believable scenarios in which there would be characters might not be wearing clothes. And again, I won't say it's justified. I won't say that it's necessary to the plot, but I will say that as fan service goes, this
It's more
show doesn't push
contextualized.
it. It doesn't make me
Right.
roll my eyes at any point.
Well, and even with other shows, when they do the fan service, they make a big deal about it with like sound
The glisten
effects and
filter. That's what I call it.
yeah. That is actually a fairly good point. But with this show, it's almost even though it's still there, it's almost brushed off as unimportant. After you get past the teasing, it almost comes off unimportant that Ryoko is naked.
Well, and
In
what's
that
most
scene.
interesting about that also is Tenchi himself is not really that interested in like seeing the girls naked. Tenchi's dad is, but
Yeah.
Tenchi himself is embarrassed by nudity. He is embarrassed to be with all of these women fawning over him, but in a very realistic way.
Yeah, and that's what keeps him to be still a pretty good role model, is that where there's, again, like I mentioned, a lot of protagonists, they're kind of skeevy in the sense
And
that
they're
you'll
either
see them like,
skeevy or they take it too far.
yeah,
They're like
absolutely.
run screaming from the room, or they literally like they lose all their blood.
Yeah, and it's way too pronounced. Where Tenchi is just trying to be as respectful as he can. He was raised to be a respectful character, or a respectful boy. And there's a point I want to bring up, is that I think it's a very strong point in the show of Tenchi's mom. I think Tenchi's mom is a big reflection that's supposed to be put onto the show, that kind of makes it feel less like a male power fantasy, and it feels more like it makes a point with all these women surrounding him and his respect for them and his relationship with his mom and how much that affects his attitude and such. Even though they don't reference it constantly, I feel like it does. They do a pretty good job in terms of bringing that context there.
Well, and we keep coming back to that word context, and one of the key things that I feel with Tenchi Muyo Ryo-Ohki, not even opposed to like other anime shows, other harem anime, because that's admittedly kind of a low bar, but even other anime in general, is I notice that Tenchi Muyo will dedicate time to building characters. It will dedicate time to unnecessary scenes that tell you more about an individual. And this might be one of the reasons why don't mind the slice of life anti-king as much, is because those scenes don't have to be there. We don't have to see Ryoko reading a light manga to figure out how Earthlings mate. But, with that said, it tells me more about Ryoko as a character. And that can be hit or miss, I'll admit. If I don't care about the character, that will annoy me. But I like Ryoko, I like Ayeka. I don't think there's a single character in the cast I actively dislike. And
Right.
I say that without any... Oh man, when we get to this final question, you are going to be mad at me. I do have a final question in mind before we move on, but I'm going to get ahead of myself. So...
Well, I wanna ask real quick, and then because I kind of have a series of questions about Tenchi, and this is kind of our thoughts after watching it. First off, do you have favorite moments from the show?
Do I have a favorite moment from the show? Yes, there are.
Like whether it be a list or a singular moment, up to you.
There are 4 moments that really stand out, and they might surprise you. One of the moments is Mihoshi in her spaceship, getting her briefing, and she has the little cube, and things just keep appearing. And I love the technology there, because I love good sci-fi, and the idea that you can materialize just anything in this ship is fascinating to me.
Absolutely.
Another moment, a second moment I really, really like is, of course... Now, here's where this is going to be a little weird. I love the introduction of Ryoko, knowing what we know about her after watching it.
Absolutely.
Going back and watching that again. Going back and watching that again is just...
It's very revealing.
Absolutely. Well, and just picture that feeling. It's very much hanging on this... essentially mummy that's treated as a monster, and if you know what is happening and you know what it is, it's almost kind of touching.
Absolutely.
And that's what I mean, is that it's interesting to see that in that new context. One of my favorite scenes, scene number 3 of 4, and I'm sorry if I'm just listing at this point. But
it's all right.
I love the scene with the duel at the end. Everything about that.
Oh, yeah.
That character, the horribly offensive gay stereotype voice. I love it. I love it. That is a very fine cheese. But number 4 is, of course, probably the biggest moment. And that's Kageto's death. Spoiler, I guess. We have to stop saying spoiler. We said it 10 times. Kageto's death. Because he doesn't even flinch. He just turns around, he's like, "You've won, boy." And he's smiling. I love that. Because you're waiting for this big payoff. This no, like Frieza or something. Where he doesn't give it to you, and I love that. He is so understated as a villain, it becomes brilliant.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with his villainy. Is that all?
Those are my big 4 that just pop out of my head at the moment.
All right. And as for me, oddly enough, like even though I kind of criticize the slice of life episodes. Some of them have some of my favorite moments because they're so character oriented. One of my absolute favorite moments is because they preface it with Tenchi looking at the kimono that was his mother's.
Hmm.
And it's kind of a series of moments that stretch out through the episode. But he kind of, you focus it and you get that context. His mother wore that kimono, and so it's very important to him. It's sentimental. And then a little later, you see Ryoko wearing it, and Tenchi walks in, and he's flabbergasted. He's dumbstruck, and it's like finally for one moment, Tenchi finds something to really like about Ryoko and seeing her in that kimono. And then you get the moment where she's spinning and spinning and she's caught on the doorknob and she rips one sleeve off by accident and not thinking about it. She doesn't know the context that we know and that Tenchi has. She rips off the other sleeve and it makes Tenchi so angry and he says, "I hate you." And that put together is a good moment because it creates this character for Tenchi that there is a breaking point. But the thing that really brings it together, once you get past the kind of silly subplot or the main plot, I guess, of that where the rabbit cat runs off,
Hmm.
when he comes back, she is almost ashamed of herself for what she did. She's standing out there waiting for him. It's one of the few moments where she's really vulnerable in the show, and she's showing this sort of real feelings she has, and she's standing there with the kimono sewed up as best she could. And you can see it. She's not very good at it, and so you can see the thread and whatnot. And she's there, and to me, that really stuck out in my mind because it's such a revealing character moment for Ryoko that you eventually see more of due to Zero. But it's such a great moment that doesn't need a lot of lines to it, and that's one of my favorites. I'll be quick about my other ones. Um, I love the Washu being having this
Mm.
motherly instinct thing. That's just one of my favorites
Oh yeah.
things. It doesn't really come into play too much, but it really makes me feel like Washu's more of a human than she initially was represented, where she's kind of a sociopath scientist. Uh, she kind of comes off as more human than you realize. That's a great moment. Third, and this is kind of, I'll put it in kind of an overall thing. I love the action in this show. This show does action oddly well.
Well, it is understated, I think, because the action doesn't come around every episode.
Right.
Not like the really hard hitting people getting mortally wounded action. And so when it does come, it's almost visceral compared to it. It's unusual, and
And
that,
so original
yeah.
in a lot of ways with how their technology works and whatnot, what they're able to do. It's very interesting, and it kind of always manages to stay unique, no matter how many battles they end up actually having.
Yeah, and there's a lot in there. There's lightsaber battles, there's space battles, there's psychic battles, there are battles with guns, there's battles with just everything.
Right.
Um, and it works to the show's advantage, as you said. I think that there's not a single fight in this show that I would say I found boring.
Right.
And that almost sounds like backwards. Like, how can you find it fight boring? Well, sometimes you do. But
Sometimes it's just noise.
yeah, and the fact that they don't overplay their hand in terms of the action, I think, is what makes it hit so well. Because what scenes there are well done, but the
Right.
scarcity really means that they are, for lack of a better word, special. It is something that you don't normally see, even though you're aware it can happen.
Absolutely. And as a final moment, there's something I just kind of enjoy, even though it's not big through the show. Well, actually, the specific moment, but what kind of spawns off in relation is not big, but the specific moment is great. The reveal of Tenchi's grandpa, not only just the reveal, which is absolutely a phenomenal moment, with how everything's done. It shocked me as a kid, and I still feel the energy as an adult. But what I love about it is you see more of his character afterwards, and he kind of comes off as playful and like he's obviously more knowing than almost any of them, but he's such a comedic character that you don't expect that from him. But it's great. But the reveal itself is, and everything afterwards dealing with his character is phenomenal throughout the show.
Um, on that note, I do want to say it is about time to start winding down. So I kind of want to. There's a couple of questions I want to ask you, and there's something I planned. You'll see it in a second. And
all right, real quick, because I want to get these out of the way, and we can be quick about this.
Please.
Favorite character.
Okay, as I was about to ask you the same question, so but we will come back to favorite character. But
all right,
final general thoughts on the anime.
Well, it's funny because I was thinking about how this would stack up compared to my childhood memories of it, and nothing will ever stack up to how much I loved it as a kid. Like that, just my kid senses were just like overblown and loving how different the show was. But it's funny because I thought it would be way more painful watching it as an adult, but I actually found myself enjoying it a lot. And even though I still have criticisms, I still find the show very enjoyable and very endearing and somewhat genuine even.
I'd like to add something to that also, is that I will say that one thing about me that might not be obvious is that when I am watching something by myself, I almost never laugh. If I'm watching with friends and family, I'll laugh, sure, because I mean it's a social thing. But if I'm just sitting in my room watching an anime or a comedy or anything, I don't sit there and laugh to myself. And yet, this show did make me laugh at a few points.
Yeah.
This show had me actually physically laughing, and the writing is very good. The characters are very good. It's memorable. It's a classic. I would say if anyone has not seen this is a great way to start. But with that said, I would also say it is gratuitous at times. That there is a lot of silliness to it. There's drama and there's silliness. And while the drama is good, the contrast can make it come across as melodrama. If you're looking for a seriously dramatic show, you're going to be in for a rude awakening.
Right. It's kind of its weird mixture.
With all that in mind, I would say that just the first two seasons, Tenchi Muyo Ryo-Ohki, I would say stone cold classic. I would say must watch for anyone who wants to watch anime, and I would say that I am glad I watched it. Those are my final thoughts on it. But
absolutely, I'm in the same boat with you on that one.
Now for the last thing, okay, so I'm gonna ask you a question. Now here's what I'm gonna do. Don't tell me right away.
All right.
It's not favorite character. It's the question every Tenchi fan has to answer, and I'm going to count us among that. It's favorite girl. Now, don't tell me. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to count down 3, and we'll do it for both of us. I'm going to count down 3, 2, 1, and I will try and guess who your favorite girl is, and you say who it is, and if we do different girls, but if we're both right, it's going to be funny. So I'll say 3, 2, 1. I'll say who I think your favorite girl is.
All right, hold up. Question. So, wait, first off, you want us to say it at the same time?
I'm saying I'll count down 3, 2, 1. I'll say who I think your favorite girl is, and you say who your favorite girl is. We'll see if we're right about the other person.
All right, so one after the other. So you say what you think mine is, and then I say mine.
If you want, we can try and do it together. But because it might be funny if it's in unison, but we'll see.
My only thing with the unison is that with us being mics and over internet or whatever, it might not work out so well.
That's fine. Okay, so I will try and guess your favorite girl first.
One more question.
Okay.
One more question. Is this about favorite girl just in general, or in terms of context for Tenchi? Because those are two different answers for me.
Favorite. Oh, okay. So we'll do that one separate. Favorite girl for you as a person. Who's your favorite girl in the show first? And I will count down 3. I'll say who I think you're going to answer, then you answer.
All right.
Okay, so I'll go. Thinking. 3, 2, 1. Washu.
Oh no. My favorite. You might actually be kind of surprised. My favorite girl in general, and I want to explain this a little bit, is Mahoshi.
Okay.
Um, because and this is me as a kid. I'm answering. Because as a kid, like nowadays, obviously she's a dumb blonde stereotype. There's a big aspect of that. But as a kid, I didn't get that. As a kid, she's just fun loving. Yeah, she's kind of dim witted, but she's like the most fun and energetic, and she was just life loving and whatnot. As in terms of like as a kid, she was my favorite. Um, I'm not going to tell you who my favorite is now because it deals also with the answer of in context of Tenchi. And
Okay. So
I want
so
to,
that was your favorite as a kid as Mahoshi, but your favorite now has changed.
yes.
Okay. Now you can count me down and tell me who you think my favorite now is, and I'll tell you.
All right. Cause I'm so split on this one. Cause I have different reasons for either one I choose. I'm gonna keep one in my head. And I'm gonna say that one, and there's a chance I could be wrong, a fairly decent sized chance I could be wrong, but I'm going to say it because this is just what I think. So, 3, 2, 1, Ayeka,
It's Mahoshi.
Mahoshi.
We had the same answer. Mahoshi's my favorite now. It wasn't when I was younger.
No,
No,
like
but
and Mahoshi is still high up on that list for
she
me.
has
If
the
you
best
take out,
scenes. She has the scene of "Please don't eat my gun."
yes, yes, absolutely. That made me
Um,
laugh out loud.
That's what I mean. And you're right. There's a stereotype. She's dumb. She's useless. She's kind of annoying. But there's something just so darn likable about that
Absolutely.
naivete.
Yeah, and she's still high up there on my list. She's probably still second. It's just as kid me specifically, if I were to answer that question, Mahoshi, absolutely. She's still high up there and second on my list. But again, my choice has kind of changed after this rewatching.
Hmm.
And so, how do you want to do this second
Okay, so
question?
now the second one is your favorite girl now, and also who you think the best girl for Tenchi is.
Yes.
Okay. Um, okay, let me think about who your answer is. Okay, I'm thinking based on. All right, three. I'll say it first. 3, 2, 1. Ryoko.
Yes, absolutely. And if I can take a minute to explain, um, watching this show, there is a very strong case made for Ryoko. Not only in the fact that when they revealed how long she's been watching him, which is that was one of my I should have put that on the list of one of my favorite moments because that is one of my favorite moments, even though it's so small.
Mm-hmm.
It brings such a very likable element, something that was kind of missing because at first she was just kind of like, oh yeah, she's a badass and she's kind of mean in a sense, but she's also a pirate. But that moment alone brought such a likability to her and brings probably my opinion the strongest case for her. Not only that, but just everything she's willing to do for Tenchi, and that she does know him the longest, and that when you get to the zero Ryoko episodes, it brings even that much more force to it. And even though, like, let's be honest, it's between two girls, because the other ones are just kind of back characters. Oh, they're great characters, but they're back characters. It's between Ayeka and Ryoko, right? In terms of what the creators wanted
Mm-hmm.
you to focus on, and Ryoko is my choice all the way, and she's my favorite because she does develop this she's probably, in my personal opinion, the most complex personality on the show, and that's why I think that's my case for her being the best choice for Tenchi.
If elected class president.
Yeah, right. All right.
No, I agree.
And I'm not.
I think so. I have a different answer. I have a different answer, but it may not be for the reasons that you will like.
Because I'm gonna be honest. Like my idea is the reason why I picked Ayeka beforehand is because I feel like, to a point, she represents a sort of a reasonableness that the show lacks.
Well,
Um,
if we're going by just who my favorite girl is, if we're going to use the word waifu jokingly, it would be Mahoshi. But if you ask me which
r-
girl do I think is best for Tenchi, I have a very specific answer, and it is actually not Ryoko. I think the show does go for that, certainly. But I will count down. Okay, I've already narrowed down 2 out of there, so there's only 3 left, and it's not Sasami.
Right.
So
So,
I've kind of already killed it, so we won't do the skipping thing. But I actually do think that Ayaka is a better choice. Now,
all right. So,
now here's where we get in a fist fight. The reason
yeah.
I say this is that as much as I think that Ryoko does care for Tenchi and that she loves Tenchi and that she would very much make Tenchi happy, I do question how much of that is true romantic love versus just like, not to make it creepy, like motherly love or love of someone in the sense that you have just always known them and you admire them and you are fascinated by them. And I don't know, even though the show obviously tries to frame it as such, how much of that is true romantic love versus Ayaka. And the reason I say that is because Ayaka does not have that background, is because Ayaka did not grow up watching Tenchi from a baby. And she still has these very strong feelings. It does strike me more as a romantic love than... It seems like when I look at Ryoko that the love is definitely there. She loves him very much and the show is framing it, but I don't know if I can quantify it as romantic love versus just like pure love, true love. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I absolutely get your argument, and it'll be one of those things, as we've had with our off-air discussions. It's one of those things we'll definitely agree to disagree on, with full understanding on each other's side.
What's interesting is that neither of us said Washu for anything.
Yeah, well, and Washu's a great character, but again, I think she comes so late, and her character is so isolated most of the time that she, even though she's a great character, she won't come up that high on our list compared to all the other characters.
And if we keep watching season 3, there's a new love interest.
Yeah.
We're not doing that.
Yeah.
I won't put you through that. But speaking of putting each other through it, I do think we've reached that point where we are going to have to wind up the session. It's been about an hour, so like I said, I would recommend it. I do think Mahoshi is my favorite girl, but I do think that Ayaka, predictable though it might be, is set up as the best match. Gable?
I also do recommend it. It's surprisingly held up over the years, not only in design but in writing. Mayoshi is always going to have a special place in my heart as my childhood favorite, and she still is separate from the rest of the pack. What?
I hope this doesn't turn into a fan art thing.
Oh man, but she is separate from the pack in my heart. For just my childhood years. But Ryoko has set a place
she has earned her place on that pedestal.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, that's how I felt about watching Tenchi Muyo this time around.
All right, so the last thing to do before we end the inaugural episode of Do You Have Anime, and hey, you made it through it, listener, thank you, because we absolutely appreciate it. But
absolutely,
we have to leave you hanging because I was able to name more flavors of ice cream than Gable before we started, which means that I actually won the challenge for this week, our first ever challenge. And, Gable, I have good news and I have bad news.
Oh man, I feel like they're the same.
The good news is that we're watching a similar show to Tenchi. The bad news is I wanted you, if I won the challenge today, to watch a harem show that is not good because we got off light this time. This is the top tier, and I want to be an informed comparison between Tenchi Muyo versus another harem show, and this is one that I watched that I would consider pretty much the stereotypical example. And I will start by giving you a brief non-spoiler plot rundown.
All right.
A young man, I would assume a high schooler, gets a note from his grandfather. His grandfather has fled to the Caribbean, And as a result, he is now going to leave his grandson his mansion staffed but entirely by female maids.
Oh no.
And also, this poor boy has a girl allergy, so if any girl tries to touch him, he gets very sick.
Oh boy. That
Gable,
sounds
I'm
about
making
right.
you next week. I'm challenging you to watch at least four
Well,
episodes.
not next week.
At least four
Not next
episodes
week.
of Hanayukyo Maid Team. Hanayukyo Maid Team. And we'll talk about it next time. In Do You Even Anime? We will answer that question.
Wow. Okay. I'm not sure if I'm looking forward to that.
I
But
have
not to
no
say
doubt
next
your
week.
vengeance will be swift.
It will be. Oh, trust me. But not next week. The week after, because we're going to do this every other week. So if for listeners listening out there, this is going to be in every other week. Because if we tried to do 2 podcasts a week, we'd go insane.
You heard the man.
Look forward to that, and look forward to another episode of the Pedanticast, where we're going to discuss very odd subjects about Ed, and Eddie. Thank you for joining us. We're happy to do this, and we're happy that you made it this far. If you've made it this far, if you haven't, I'm talking to nobody, and I don't care. Hopefully, we will get a great library of animes through this, or anime, because that's the plural form.
And hey, if you want to watch along with us, we recommend it. If you've never seen it, I recommend it. It is not I wouldn't say it's a good show, but that's half the fun after all.
Absolutely. Is it PG-13 though?
I should mention that before anyone watches it, this show would be rated TVMA. So if there is anyone watching under the age of 18, please follow the guidelines in your living area.
We claim no responsibility.
None whatsoever. But, Gable, we will find out soon if you do in fact anime. Until then...
If I make it to that time.
Until then, I am Tio-kun, this is Gable-san, and we are searching the archives. See you, Space Cowboy.